We are live. Good morning, Rick. How are you?
Good morning, Sarah. I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good. Well, today I'm looking forward to learn about another topic. So, let me share the banner to our viewer so that they know who you are a little bit. And if you are new, let me introduce you to our new show. This is this is Rick Rhodes. So this is his information. Rick Rhodes is his author. So I am going to just put on very quickly and we'll talk and introduce him a little bit later. So that's all. And from myself, and this is me, Sarah M. I'm also an author and speaker, but today I'm not going to talk about my book. I'm going to talk about Rick. Rick Rhodes is the author of the 10th nonfic- nonfiction book, and he's going to give you a summary of one topic today. So, with that in mind, let me take off my banner. Okay, I am going to uh, share with you a little bit about Rick. So just give me 1 minute. Our presenter today is a 10-time nonfiction book author and an authority on American history. He spent most of his adult life living aboard boats and has traveled far and wide in America. Let's welcome Rick Rhodes.
Thank you.
Rick, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. I trust you're doing well. Today we're going to talk about uh, somebody most people should already know, but they might not. Harriet Tubman. She was on a postage stamp, and she was one of the first woman in my book. She was
Yeah.
born an illiterate slave on Maryland's eastern shore, an area I know fairly well, Dorchester County, Maryland, near Cambridge, Maryland. She was illiterate, as many slaves were. Later on, if we do Frederick Douglass, we'll talk about a slave who became very well literate. But Harriet was always literate. She was very close to her parents, and she was a frail, sickly child. But when she became an underground railroad conductor, or sooner or later, she endured some of the feats of physical endurance that go beyond the pale. And she was quite the woman, a fascinating lady, and somebody all Americans, black or white, should be very proud of, and have her as a stamp in the history of America. Uh, Now back to her story. When she was a child, she used to rock a white little baby to sleep, and if the baby cried, she would get whipped on the neck. And one time she remembers she got whipped on the neck 5 times before breakfast. And she had those scars the rest of her life. So her childhood was not easy, not and it was slavery. I don't care what you say. I get in arguments with some of my southern friends. They say the Civil War was not about slavery. Story. The Civil War ended slavery, put it that way. Later on, she was in a dry goods store. She was about 12 years old when she was in Cambridge, Maryland again. And there was another slave she was talking to who wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in the field working. His overseer came into the store and found him. And he said, "Oh, there you are." He was really mad. He took a 2 pound lead weight. I don't know what it was, but it's 2 pound lead weight. And he threw it at the guy. His aim was bad. The guy bolted and didn't get hit, but poor Harriet got it right in the head and knocked her unconscious and nearly killed her. She came to and she had headaches the rest of her life and had seizures because of this accident in her head that she was not supposed to get hit in the head at all. She was just talking to the guy. She didn't know he was not supposed to be there. So she had a really rough. Her childhood was not nice, but she became very religious, and she was close to her parents and her fairly large family. She saw three of her brothers and sisters sold off, a horrible thing, and it just wasn't good. So she knew some more of her family was going to be sold off. and two of her brothers decided to make a break for freedom. I believe the year was 1849, 11 years before the Civil War. And the three of them, they escaped from Cambridge, Maryland, and they were in the swamps. They were cold. They didn't know where they were doing. They were lost. And their brother said, let's all go back and take a whipping, and go back. We know how to get back to the plantation we came from. And Harriet was like, really, guys? And they did. And they came back to a whipping, and they were back. And so that was that. Now, a couple years later, Harriet decided, I'm not going to get my brother's help. I'm going to do it all on my own. I'm going to get the freedom by myself. And there was a thing called the Underground Railroad, which was mostly free blacks. And there were a lot of free blacks, Quakers, Methodists, Presbyterians were some of the major religious groups that were involved in that. And she knew a little bit about that. She knew a lot more in the coming years, but she did it on herself, by herself, without her brother's help, and made it all the way to Pennsylvania freedom from southern Maryland on Maryland's eastern shore, up near Wilmington, Delaware, where she came and arrived in freedom. And she was really, really astonished and really happy to have freedom. So she just felt bad about people that were still stuck in the swamps of Maryland. And one of her first trip all the way back to Cambridge, Maryland, was to get her husband. She was married, and get her husband. Her husband was not in desperate shape. She was a free black man, but it wasn't all that great for free black people in southern Maryland or the deep south. So she goes back, sneaks back into southern Maryland, Cambridge, Maryland, finds her husband, John Tubman. Said, John, let's get out here. I know how to get us back out to Pennsylvania. Well, he had found another woman and wouldn't go. What did she do? She was betrayed. She risked her life for this idiot, and he wouldn't go, and he cheated on her and everything else. And I think this is a great story. She says, and he wouldn't work the salt anything. He says, well, who the heck else in here wants to get out and make a break for freedom? I'm not going to waste this trip on that idiot. And that's exactly what she did. I think she took 11 people out on her first trip, and she got them all the way back to Pennsylvania. And I think this was this is the beginning of her great Underground Railroad history. She basically took an adversity, a major adversity, being betrayed and cheated on, and the guy wouldn't go. And she said, who the heck else in here wants to get out? I'll get you out of here. And then from then on, she became a very great Underground Railroad conductor. She made at least 13 more trips back to southern Maryland to get folks out. She made her and she made her trips in the wintertime when the nights were longer. She traveled by night, and she always left on a Friday because the news of runaway slaves would be posted in the newspaper the following Monday. So she had a 2-day jump on slave catchers and hunters. So, and she knew where the safe houses were on the Underground Railroad, the Quakers, the free blacks, and people like that. And she took that adversity with her husband and made it. And by several accounts, we don't know how many trips she made for sure. She made at least 13. She might have made many more than that. She took at least 70 people out. She might have taken 300 out. It's hard to say. There's stories, there's legends out there. Anyway, long and short of it, she was called Moses. Who was this woman, or who was this person? They didn't know it was a woman taking all these people out of Maryland, in the Underground Railroad, and it was Harriet Tubman. They didn't have any idea who it was. This little old fragile, sickly girl who did these great feats of courage during the Underground Railroad, and she took a pistol with her. And the pistol, she said, it was from the two of my brothers. I don't want anybody to get weak kneed, and they could. What are we doing in the swamps up to our chest with creatures? There's some nasty creatures in the swamps of Maryland. I'm fairly familiar with that area. And she said, everybody turns back, I'll point this gun at you. And she never used the gun in anger, but she carried that experience with her two brothers. The only time she did use that gun, she took the butt end of it, and she had some infected teeth on one of her trips, and she knocked her own tooth out. To basically, if you ever had a tooth infection, you know how painful that is. And she did that with the butt of her gun. It's the only time she ever used that pistol. But just an amazing woman. She did all this stuff, and she very heroic at a time when slavery was bad, and we had some laws that made slavery bad, and we had the Underground Railroad, And we had some great underground railroad conductors, and she was probably one of the greatest. She lived to be one of the oldest. She had more hardship than any other conductor in the Underground Railroad, but she outlived them all. She lived to be 91 years old. Uh, but when the Civil War started, she was like many, and she was illiterate, but she wasn't that. She was no dummy. She knew that the Civil War was going to be about slavery eventually, and it was, and there's no doubt about it. And I have to argue that with some of my Southern friends, but she took part in that. She was a laundress, a seamstress, a nurse. I think I don't think she knew anything about nursing, and did that in the Civil War. She even led a raid in South Carolina, in the Low Countries of South Carolina is a lot like the Low Country of Maryland. There's swamps and stuff. And she led a Union party near the end of the Civil War to free. I think 300 troops was what she led to free blacks in the plantations near the end of the war and free them and during the end of the war. And she was quite an amazing person. She did that. And after the war, she had correspondence with Frederick Douglass, who was he was an intellectual, more so self-taught. Hopefully, we do a program on him later on. But and then they said something like, "If I'll read it. I won't paraphrase it." They were talking. They knew each other. All these people knew each other back then, and basically, Harriet Tubman said. Douglas asked a word of Harriet, or Harriet asked a word of from Frederick Douglass. Say something nice about me when you speak to introduce you. And this is what Douglas said: the difference between us is very marked. Most of what I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in public. But you, Harriet, have wrought at night. You have not had the applause of a crowd, and most of you what you've done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scared, and sore-footed bondsmen and women. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witness to your devotion to freedom and your heroism. I think that says a lot about both of them. Really, really two wonderful people that were active in the Underground Railroad. Late in her life, she, with the help of Secretary of State William Seward, she settled in Auburn, New York, which is also a pretty strong uh, city of abolition or free. He helped her a bit. She started a home for indigenous black people and wounded black soldiers. They were black soldiers fighting for the Union in the Civil War. And she said, "I'm supposed to take care of my people as long as I live." And she did that. Uh, Lived there and took care of people. She was always strapped for cash. Never had a lot of money. They operated on her head. I think without that, she still had those amazing headaches from that 2 pound lead weight being thrown in the store. And she they operated on her head without anesthesia, and she felt better a little bit, but she still had all that for the rest of her life. She lived to be 91 years old, and when she died, I think the year was 1913. They had a military funeral for her. She died with military honors, which is tells you how far the country finally came. But her last words as she was dying, this is interesting too: "I go prepare a place for you." So there's a lot more to Harriet Tubman than that, but that's just a wonderful story about a wonderful, brave woman who was not supposed to mount to anything. A sickly young child, and she outlived them all and did more feats of endurance than anybody could possibly imagine. A great human being and a great American, Harriet Tubman. Thank you, Sarah.
Wow, what an amazing person she is.
Absolutely.
Thank, yeah, thank you, Rick. So, let me show you the book. Her story is featured in this book. Let me show you. They made America great. So that's the book that we are talking about, and you can find this book in Rick website, rickrhodes.com. You can also find on Amazon, but if you order direct from Rick, he would autograph for you. So either way, I hope that you can grab the book and let me.
And if you're not inclined to reading a book, I have an audio book you can listen to. It's about 7 hours long. Same thing done by a guy who's really great.
Awesome, great. Well, I have some question for you, Rick.
Okay.
All right. So, what drew you to Underground Railroad Conductor Harriet Tubman for your 10th nonfiction book?
Everybody should know about the Underground Railroad. One of my books is on the Ohio River, and my favorite chapter until I wrote my 10th book was chapter 3 of my Ohio River book, which is on the Underground Railroad in the Ohio River. So I wrote a whole chapter on the. I have a program on the Underground Railroad, and I talk. I know most of the Ohio River and many other Underground Railroad conductors. I read several books on the Underground Railroad, and so there's many people there, and I just choose the most famous one. And her story is truly amazing, and many of their stories are amazing, but she was especially amazing.
Wow, that's wonderful. Okay, I have another question. What did you especially like about Harriet Tubman?
Taking a pistol and knocking her teeth out. I couldn't do that. Maybe I could. I don't know. I mean, that is really a tough lady, one tough lady, and she came from so little, couldn't read or write, sickly. Her family's broken up. She loved her parents, but she grew, and sometimes the good Lord, some people you don't expect them a lot out of them, and they exceed all possible expectations. And I think Harriet Tubman was one of those.
Uh-huh. Okay. Another question. Tell us a little bit more about that Underground Railroad.
Oh boy, I could spend 2 hours on this one. But it's a great question. And the Underground Railroad was one of the early civil disobedience movements in this country. The first one may say was a Whiskey Rebellion, but slaves were being captured, and not being captured. They were brought over from Africa, and some of them said this isn't right. We shouldn't have slavery. Back in 1850, only 5 countries in the entire world had slavery: Ethiopia, Burma, China, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Not good. And a lot of people up north, even a few people down south, said slavery is not a good thing. The laws, we had 2 laws, one in 1797, which was the first Fugitive Slave Act, where a slave could go up north in the United States and he could be caught by slave catchers, by people brought back to the South to working usually in the deep South after he tried to run away. And this went to the Supreme Court and they lost. And the law was passed, the Fugitive Slave Act, the first one of 1797, which made it any slave going to the north was not always free. They had to go further north. They had to go to British Canada. And Canada, like I said, back in 1850, Britain didn't have slavery, and Canada was part of Britain until World War One, and so the slaves had to go all the way to Canada. And then the people that knew it, were called people that didn't like slavery were abolitionists. The people that were the action arm, I would say, were the Underground Railroad conductors. Harriet Tubman and many others, many wonderful people were Underground Railroad conductors, and because of the first Fugitive Slave Act, and then we had a second Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, I believe it was, where basically we had the slave catching industry developed after the first act, but after the second act, if a government employee, let's say I was a postmaster in some little town in Pennsylvania, I knew of a runaway slave. If I didn't tell the authorities that, I could be fined $1,000, which is like $25,000 in today's money, a year's salary, very easily. That made the North responsible for forcing Southern slavery. So what it did is it kind of backfired. More people got into the act, and the North said, "You can't." The South can't tell us. It led to the Civil War, basically. The South can't tell us what to do, how to legislate our morality on slavery, which we think is not that good. Like I said, only 5 countries in 1850 had slavery, and many people said this was wrong. Let's get them out of there. There were 4 million slaves at the start of the Civil War, and I don't know how many got out because it was all secret. And there's a guy in Philadelphia named Still, where Harriet Tubman went. They kept a pretty good record, but even that was if he ever got caught, they would know the ins and outs of who the conductors were. The conductors were a lot of free blacks. People don't give free blacks a lot of credit that they should. But a lot of free blacks were involved. Certain religious groups, Quakers stand out among others, and a few other people on a morality issue say slavery is bad. We got to stop it. We're going to help these people get out. So the Underground Railroad itself, I have a 2 hour program on that. It's just a wonderful story, and Harriet Tubman is one of my favorite conductors. So I'll end it there, Sarah.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, I really like this lady.
Oh,
She's so brave.
frail, but you did it all. Yeah.
Yeah, brave and well courageous.
And outlived them all, too.
Mm.
91 years old, which is a pretty long time in 1913.
Yeah, yeah. Where she get all that energy?
She was very religious. She was very religious. She really believed in God was going to take care of everything, and he did, obviously. You know.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you the banner one more time. So this is the banner. Rick Road. His website is rickrhodes.com. And the title of the book that we are discussing is They Made America Great. So I hope you get a hold of it, and we will be back. And thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for
Thank
letting me tell
you.
the story.
Yeah. So, oh, I forgot to show her picture. This amazing woman.
5 feet tall. She's
She's 1 inch taller than me. Okay.
that's right.
At least she made to five. I didn't make it. All right. So that's the courageous Harriet Tubman. And the book one more time is They Made America Great. And the website you see at rickrhodes.com. And I appreciate you, Rick. And we will see all of you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.